Evan Brooks pressed himself against the jagged rock wall as the distant thunder of hooves rolled through the valley below. The wind tore across the narrow ridge like a living thing, carrying the scent of iron, snow, and something else, something dangerous. The sound was too organized to be wild horses and too urgent to be travelers. His breath came out in tight bursts, frosting the raw air in front of him. He knew who those riders were. He knew they weren't looking for anyone except him. And yet, despite the odds stacked high as the Absaroka Mountains surrounding him, Evan didn't run. Not this time. Not after what he'd allowed himself to become. A bullet ricocheted off the stone inches from his head, showering him with dust. Another followed. They were getting closer. And Evan Brooks, once a man who didn't fear much of anything, felt the startling truth settle in his chest. This was the price of choosing to do the right thing. And dawn hadn't even broken. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Only 12 hours earlier, Evan Brooks had believed the next 3 days would be nothing more than easy money. A simple job, a simple cage, a simple lie he could tell himself so he wouldn't have to remember the man he used to be. The road into Snow Hollow wound between towering cliffs carved by centuries of wind and winter. His horse, an aging bay mare named Ruby, moved carefully over the frozen ground. Evan guided her with a familiarity born from years of silent companionship. His coat was patched, his boots were worn down at the heel, and his face showed the kind of lines a hard life carved deeper than time. From above, the narrow valley looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But Evan knew better. Montana beauty always had teeth. As Ruby rounded the final bend, the whole setup came into view. A crude iron cage standing alone beneath a cluster of towering pines. A small campfire smoked lazily beside it, and 3 men waited there. Barlow Granger and his hired hands, Tommy Ridge and Hank Murdoch. Barlow Granger stood out like a stain on clean snow. Stocky, confident, and too well fed to be a wandering showman, as he claimed. Barlow wore a heavy coat trimmed with fur, and a grin that never reached his eyes. He was the sort of man who learned very young that people could be bought, and very old that souls could be sold. "You're late, Brooks," Barlow called without lifting his gaze from the knife he was polishing. The steel glinted coldly in the winter light. Evan swung down from Ruby. Storm slowed the trail. "Storm or conscience?" Barlow raised a brow. "Doesn't matter either way. Job's the same. 3 days, $200, no questions." Evan didn't answer. Not yet. A man like him had learned that silence bought fewer problems than truth. Tommy Ridge, young and thinner than the rest, edged closer. His eyes darted around nervously, as if the mountains themselves were watching. "Barlow wants you to know she's arriving soon," Tommy said quietly. "Figure you ought to be ready." "Who?" Evan asked, though he already felt the uncomfortable shift in his gut. Barlow's smile widened. "Our merchandise. A woman with a story worth selling. And folks east of here eat that kind of thing up. She'll bring in good money, but only if she's alive and unspoiled. That's where you come in." Evan's jaw tightened. He looked at the cage again. Solid iron, hauled piece by piece into this remote hollow. Someone had put a great deal of effort into preparing this prison. Too much effort for anything lawful. "Why here?" he asked. "Far enough from town, close enough to move her," Barlow replied simply. "Perfect spot for a short stay." It wasn't an answer, and everyone knew it, but none of the men spoke up. Hank tossed Evan a canvas bag of provisions. Enough for both of you, Hank muttered. Don't waste the water. Evan caught the bag and slung it over his shoulder. His fingers brushed the cold metal of his revolver. He didn't want trouble. Not today. Not ever again. Trouble had taken enough from him already. His ranch, his wife, his hope. But something about the cage, something about the way Barlow kept saying merchandise. It scraped against the part of Evan's conscience he had buried deep but never quite killed. Barlow stepped forward, lowering his voice. Keep her in the cage. Keep her breathing. We return tomorrow evening. You'll make your money and ride off. That's all. Evan nodded. It wasn't acceptance. It was survival. The sound of approaching horses pulled all their attention toward the trail. 2 riders emerged from the trees, leading a 3rd horse between them. And on that horse, despite the ropes binding her wrists and the cold cutting through her thin dress, sat a young woman with pale skin, fair hair tangled by wind, and a bruise darkening one side of her face. Claire Dawson. She didn't look at the men. She didn't cry or plead. She held her head high, her eyes burning with a mixture of exhaustion and defiance that struck Evan harder than the winter air. Barlow's men dragged her down. She stumbled but didn't fall. She steadied herself and turned toward the cage, toward Evan. And in that single look, he felt something inside him twist sharply. Because Claire wasn't afraid, she was furious, furious at them, furious at the world, furious at the injustice she'd been forced into, and furious at him, the man who was supposed to guard her. Tommy Ridge gulped, shifting uneasily. She's sizing you up, Brooks, he murmured. Reckon she's wondering if you're worth killing when she gets the chance. Evan didn't respond, though Tommy wasn't entirely wrong. Claire's stare was the kind that stripped a man of excuses and left him naked before his own failures. She stepped willingly into the cage. The iron door clanged shut behind her, echoing off the surrounding cliffs like a funeral bell. Barlow tossed the heavy iron key toward Evan. 3 days, he repeated. Not a mark on her. She's worth more without scars. The riders mounted up. The valley grew still as they left, taking the noise, the smoke, and the fragile sense of normalcy with them. Silence settled heavily. Evan forced himself to approach the cage. He could feel Claire's eyes on him, steady, unblinking. I'll bring you water, he muttered, hating how small the words sounded. She didn't move. And in that moment, even before the sun dipped behind the distant peaks, Evan Brooks felt the first tremor of something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Shame. And shame was the kind of thing that could break open a man's past and remake his future. Evan woke before the sun, though he doubted he had slept at all. Cold had soaked into his bones during the night, an ache that matched the heaviness in his chest. The valley lay in a dim blue hush. The cage sat where it had before, wrong against the frost-hardened earth. Claire was awake, knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight for warmth. Frost clung to the iron bars. Her breath clouded the air, but her eyes were clear. Evan coaxed last night's fire back to life, then rose with the tin cup in his hand. He kept glancing toward the trail as if expecting Barlow to ride back early. Or maybe he just didn't trust himself alone with what he was doing. You're up early, he said. Claire watched him. Hard to sleep in a box. He poured water from the canteen into the dented cup and walked toward the cage. His boots crunched over the frozen ground. For a heartbeat, he considered turning back. Then he slid the cup through a gap in the bars. Careful, he said. It's not much. Her fingers were red from the cold, knuckles raw where the rope had bitten. She took the cup without touching his hand, drank, then set it back. "You guarding the water?" she murmured. "Or me?" "I'm guarding trouble," he said. "Best I can." A soft sound drifted from the tree line, half whine, half growl. Evan turned, hand going to his revolver. A ragged shape limped toward the fire on 3 good legs. The dog. It was the same bristly mutt he'd seen the day before, ribs sharp beneath matted fur, one ear torn. It stopped just outside the circle of warmth, eyes flicking from Evan to Claire and back again. "You again," Evan muttered. He crouched, palm open. The dog hesitated, then stepped closer, nose twitching. Claire watched. "He trusts you," she said. "Trust is a strong word," Evan replied. "He's just hungry." "Hungry creatures don't walk toward the hand that hurts them," she said. "He's seen you and decided you're not dangerous. That says something." "About him, maybe. About you," Claire said. He didn't answer. He broke off a strip of jerky and held it out. The dog inched closer, snatched the food, then retreated, chewing fast. A wound along its flank was crusted with dried blood. "Someone used him hard," Evan muttered. "Seems to be a pattern around here," Claire said. Silence settled. The wind shifted, carrying scents of smoke and pine out here. "You from around here?" he asked. "Closer than you might think," she said. "Town called Willow Bend. 2 days' ride east." He knew Willow Bend. Small church, smaller saloon, people who nodded but didn't invite strangers in. "What did you do to end up in Barlow's cage?" he asked. Claire watched the dog curl near the fire. "Funny thing about that," she said. "The real question is what I didn't do." He frowned, meaning. "There were 2 children," she said. "Sophie and Jamie, 8 and 6. They stayed late at the church to help clean after a supper. On their way home, 3 men decided they'd be good sport." Evan's stomach turned. "I followed them," Claire said. "I'd seen those men in the saloon. The way they talked. The way they looked at things they thought they owned. They grabbed the boy first," she went on. "Jamie. One man held him. Another told the girl to stop screaming or he'd snap the boy's neck. I had a kitchen knife in my basket." Her fingers tightened around the bars. "I used it," she said. "One man bled," she said. The other 2 ran, shouting about the crazy woman who attacked them. By the time the sheriff arrived, they had their story ready. "And yours?" Evan asked. She lifted one shoulder. "Women with no husband and no father don't have stories people listen to. Not when 3 men with land and money talk louder." Evan clenched his jaw. He could picture it. 3 red-faced men swearing they were the victims, a sheriff who didn't want trouble, a town that preferred a neat villain. "Barlow offered a solution," Claire said. "Told the sheriff he could take me off their hands. Said it'd spare Willow Bend the scandal of a hanging. Somebody called it a mercy." "And you?" Evan asked. "I called it what it was," she said. "A sale." The word hung in the cold air. The dog shifted closer to the cage, laying its head near the bars. Claire lowered a hand. The animal sniffed her fingers, then rested its muzzle against them with a faint sigh. Evan felt something loosen in his chest. "Why take this job, Mr. Brooks?" Claire asked. $200 is a week's pay, but not enough to buy back a life. So what are you really buying with that money? The question landed like a stone. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. The worn boots, the patched coat, the hollow around his eyes, or something worse. A man who'd stopped trying because trying had cost too much. He turned away, tending the fire that didn't need tending. World doesn't pay for honor, he said. It pays for work. This is work. And if the work is wrong, then I'll live with it, he muttered. She was quiet. You don't look like a man who's living, she said. You look like one who's waiting to die slow. The sun climbed higher, softening the chill but not the tension between cage and fire. By midday, Evan heard it, a rhythm beneath the wind. Hoofbeats, more than one horse, moving fast. He straightened, scanning the trail. The dog's ears pricked. Claire's fingers tightened around the bars. Barlow? She asked. Too early, Evan said, though his hand settled on his gun. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing between the stone walls, and as the first rider appeared around the bend, Evan Brooks felt the fragile balance of the hollow begin to shift. The rider who emerged around the bend was Tommy Ridge, his horse lathered with sweat despite the cold. His face carried a color that didn't belong to a quiet morning, fear fresh and rising. He scanned the hollow, spotted Evan, then Claire, then finally the cage. He slid off the horse before it fully stopped. Barlow sent you back? Evan asked, hand lowering from his revolver but not leaving it entirely. Tommy shook his head, breath fogging sharply. No, I came on my own. Claire straightened inside the cage, suspicion sharp as the frost burning her fingers. Why? Tommy looked at her, then at Evan. Because he's planning something worse than either of you think. And if I don't say it now, then I'm as guilty as the rest of them. Evan stepped closer, boots grinding hard against the frozen ground. Spit it out. Tommy swallowed, wiping his sleeve across his forehead. Barlow got a telegram early this morning. Buyer wants her moved sooner, much sooner. He's pushing the timetable. Wants her in Bozeman by tomorrow night so they can get her to the rail line headed east. Claire's jaw tightened. Evan could tell she wasn't surprised, only more resolved. That still doesn't explain what you're doing here, Evan said. Tommy licked his dry lips. Because Barlow wasn't planning on waiting until sundown. He was planning on coming now. Drunk or not, mad or not, he means to make sure she's presentable before they move her. And by presentable, Tommy hesitated, eyes dropping to the knife at Evan's hip. He means he'll break her until she stops fighting. Claire's hands curled unconsciously. The dog, Bristle, lifted its head and whined low, sensing the tension. Why tell us? Evan asked. Tommy's voice cracked. Because my kid sister's the same age as the girl she saved. He gestured weakly toward Claire. Kids don't deserve monsters, and folks like her shouldn't be punished for trying to stop them. Claire studied him a long moment. So you're not like them? Tommy shook his head. I ain't sure what I am, but I know I ain't that. A heavy silence settled, the kind born from truths neither comfortable nor complete. Evan finally exhaled, a slow release of air he didn't realize he'd been holding. All right, what do you want from me? To choose, Tommy said simply. Before Barlow gets here. The echo of his words stretched across the hollow. Claire's gaze slid to Evan, quiet but unwavering. You already know he's coming, she said softly. You've known since yesterday. Evan turned away, staring at the tree line. Snow dusted the pines, and a thin layer of ice glazed the rocks. Everything seemed too cold, too still. Knowing ain't the same as deciding. Tommy stepped closer. He'll hurt her, Evan. Maybe worse. And he'll hurt you if you so much as blink wrong. That man don't tolerate defiance. I know what kind of man he is, Evan muttered. No, Tommy said. You know the kind you used to be. That's what scares you. Evan's shoulders tensed. Memories flickered unbidden. His wife's gentle voice, the way winter storms swallowed their ranch, the debts piling like snow on the roof. Every choice he'd made since her death had been survival, stripped of hope and stripped of honor. He turned to Claire. She stood inside the cage like a storm contained. Her anger no longer wild but controlled, sharpened. Her face was bruised, her wrists raw, but nothing about her seemed defeated. "Tell me again," he said quietly. "Those children, they lived?" "Yes," she answered. "Because I ran toward the danger, not away from it." She tilted her head slightly. "Can you say the same?" The words weren't a challenge. They were an invitation. Evan paced the edge of the fire pit, boots carving uneven paths in the frost. Bristle followed him, limping, tail low. After a few passes, Evan crouched to scratch the dog's scruff. "You don't owe her anything," Tommy said hesitantly. "Barlow chose you because he thought you didn't care." "I didn't," Evan admitted. "Not until I saw her chained like an animal." Claire didn't flinch. Sometimes all it takes is seeing something clearly. The wind picked up, rattling the cage. Tommy moved his horse nearer. "You don't have long. If you're going to do something, it has to be now." Evan straightened slowly. His breath left him in a tight white cloud. "What happens if I walk away?" Tommy's answer was immediate. "Barlow will still come, and she will still pay for the truth she told." Evan's throat tightened. He knew it in the marrow of his bones. "And if I help her?" Tommy swallowed. "Then you'll be on the wrong side of Barlow Granger, and he holds grudges longer than winter." Claire spoke again, voice steady, soft. "But not longer than justice." Evan turned toward her fully. In the cold blue morning light, she looked both fragile and unbreakable, and something inside him, something he thought had died, shifted. He reached into his coat, pulled out the heavy iron key, and held it tightly. The metal felt like a verdict waiting to be spoken. Tommy stepped back, watching him with a mix of fear and hope. Bristle moved closer to Claire's cage, as if offering silent encouragement. Evan closed his eyes briefly, hearing the ticking of choices he had once refused to make. When he opened them again, they were clear. "I'm not walking away," he said. A breath escaped Claire, part relief, part disbelief. Tommy stared, stunned but relieved. "But I'm not unlocking this cage yet," Evan added. "Not until I know exactly what we're up against." Tommy nodded. "Fair, I can tell you." He stepped closer. "Barlow ain't just bringing Hank. He's bringing 2 more men from camp. They got rifles and whiskey. Not a good combination." "And the timing?" Evan asked. "Before midday," Tommy said. "He said something about teaching her a lesson before dark." The hollow grew colder. Evan exhaled slowly. "Then we prepare." Claire watched him closely, reading every movement. What can one man prepare against 4 armed ones? Evan's hand brushed the revolver at his hip. A man who's been giving up too long has very little left to lose. Tommy swallowed hard. "What do you need me to do?" "Buy us a few minutes," Evan said. "Slow them down or warn me when they're close." Tommy nodded. "I can do that." "And Claire," Evan said, turning toward her, "you stay ready." Her eyes flickered. "For what?" "For when I decide it's time to open that door." And far off, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of hoofbeats. The first sign that Barlow Granger was already on his way. The hoofbeats grew louder, rolling through the hollow like distant thunder. Evan felt each one land in his chest as he scanned the ridge above. The sky was pale, a thin winter blue that offered no warmth. The cold seemed to tighten around the hollow, drawing everything inward. His breath, his thoughts, his courage. Tommy swung back into his saddle. "I'll ride ahead," he said quietly. "Give you whatever time I can buy." Evan nodded. "Be careful." Tommy hesitated, then leaned closer. "Barlow's in one of his moods. He was talking wild when I left. Said something about teaching a man his place if anyone stepped out of line." He paused. "Which means you." Evan didn't blink. "Go." Tommy wheeled his horse and bolted up the trail, snow kicking behind him like smoke. Silence dropped again, broken only by the crackle of the small fire and Bristle's restless pacing. Claire watched Evan through the bars, the early light catching the bruise on her cheek and the quiet fury in her expression. "You're still deciding," she said. Evan didn't look at her. "I already decided." "Have you?" she asked softly. "Because your eyes don't look like a man at peace with his choice." He knelt near the fire, feeding it another stick of wood. "Peace ain't part of this. Living with myself afterward, that's what matters." "And what will you need to live with? Saving a woman, fighting cruelty, protecting a truth no one wants to hear?" Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The bars between them didn't diminish her strength. "Or will you regret not walking away sooner?" Evan stared into the flames. They flickered as though considering his doubts. "I regret a lot of things," he said. "But I'm done adding to the list." Bristle nudged his elbow, whining softly. Claire pressed her fingers against the bars, letting the dog rest his muzzle against her hand. Together, they formed a moment so gentle it felt like a betrayal of the danger closing in. Evan rose and scanned the valley again. "What's your plan?" Claire asked. "Don't have one yet," Evan admitted. "Then make one," she said. "Before they arrive?" He walked to the edge of the clearing, studying the terrain. The hollow funneled into a single narrow entrance where the trail dipped between the cliffs. That was both blessing and curse. Easy to defend, but impossible to escape unnoticed. The cliffside above the trail was loose rock, brittle with frost. If he thought like the rancher he used to be, he could use the land itself as his ally. But he only had one gun, 5 bullets, and a promise to keep. Claire watched him pace. "You're thinking about the land." "Land's honest," he said. "People ain't." "Then use the honest part," she replied. He walked along the base of the ridge, eyes narrowing where the cliff sloped steeply. A narrow ledge, barely the width of his boots, cut across the rock face. If he climbed it, he might get a vantage point above the entrance. But leaving Claire alone felt wrong in a way he couldn't shake. "Do it," she said, reading his hesitation. "You won't be far." "You don't know Barlow," Evan muttered. "I know men who think like him," she answered. "They want power, and they want witnesses. He won't touch me until he knows you're close enough to see it." Evan stopped walking. "How do you know that?" "Because if he didn't want an audience," she said, "he wouldn't have brought you into this at all." Pain washed through him at the truth of her words. Barlow had chosen him for a reason, because he looked desperate, broken, predictable, someone who wouldn't fight. Barlow misjudged him. Evan looked at the ledge again. "You sure you'll be all right?" Claire nodded once. "Go." He climbed. The cold bit his fingers as he pulled himself upward, using cracks in the rock to steady his weight. Bristle whimpered at the bottom, pacing nervously until Evan murmured a quiet reassurance that even he didn't fully believe. Halfway up, a small rock slipped beneath his boot, skittering down the cliff and clattering onto the frozen earth below. Claire flinched at the noise but didn't move. Evan gritted his teeth and kept climbing. The ledge was narrow, but he made it. From up here, he could see the trail winding between the trees, the path Tommy had taken, and further beyond. Movement. 4 riders. They were too far to make out faces, but Evan recognized Barlow by his posture alone. Upright, arrogant, certain of his dominion over every soul he crossed. Evan's stomach tightened. He climbed back down halfway, positioned himself behind a thick outcrop of rock where he could fire if needed, but wouldn't be seen immediately. His breath came slow and controlled. He checked his revolver. 5 bullets. 5 chances. He prayed he wouldn't have to use them. Below, Claire shifted her weight in the cage, steadying herself. "They're close," she called quietly. "They are," he replied. "You still have time to run," she said. He almost laughed. "And leave you? People have left for less." "I'm not people," he said. The growing thunder of hooves soon filled the hollow. Bristle barked sharply, backing up toward the cage. Claire pulled her hands away from the bars and stood tall. Barlow Granger and his men rode into the clearing with all the subtlety of a storm. Their horses snorted clouds into the cold air. Barlow had a rifle across his saddle and a half-empty bottle wedged into his coat. "Well, well," he said, voice slick as oil. "Good morning to the both of you." Claire's expression didn't change. "Barlow." He dismounted with a grunt. "You look lively enough." "Good. Buyers don't like their merchandise dull." Evan tightened his grip on the gun. Barlow's men, Hank, Royce, and Lyle, spread out, smirking, rifles at their sides. "Where's Brooks?" Royce asked. "Barlow said he'd be keeping watch." Barlow looked around. "He's nearby. He better be. If he's not, I'll—" A scream tore through the clearing. A horse, Lyle's, reared violently as Bristle lunged at its legs, snarling. Lyle cursed, grabbing for his rifle. The dog dodged, teeth flashing. "Get that mutt!" Hank shouted. The chaos erupted fast. Horses panicked, men turned, snow sprayed. Claire's eyes darted upward, straight toward Evan's hiding spot. Barlow spun toward the cage. "Enough of this. Time she learns." He raised his hand to strike her through the bars, and Evan fired. The bullet hit the ground inches from Barlow's boots, spraying dirt and ice. Barlow jerked back, shock turning to fury as he searched the ridge. "Brooks!" he roared. "You traitorous—" Evan stepped from behind the rock, gun raised, heart pounding. "That's far enough," he said, voice steady though he felt anything but. 4 rifles turned toward him at once. Claire gripped the bars behind her. Bristle growled, placing himself between her and the danger. And the hollow, for one breathless moment, held utterly still, balanced on the edge of the violence yet to come. The hollow froze in a single brittle moment. Evan on the ridge with his revolver raised, 4 rifles trained up at him. Claire gripping the bars behind her, as if holding herself still could somehow hold the world still too. Even the air seemed to pause, caught between the cold morning and the heat of what was about to unfold. Barlow was the first to move. His eyes narrowed, the fury in them sharp enough to cut through winter. "You really want to die for her, Brooks?" he shouted up the ridge. "Because that's what you're asking for." Evan didn't flinch. "Step away from the cage." Hank raised his rifle. "You take one more breath, Brooks, and I'll put a hole in you big enough." Barlow snapped his hand up. "Not yet." His voice was cold and steady, the voice of a man who knew exactly how to control chaos. "Brooks thinks he's got the high ground. Let him enjoy it for a minute." Royce muttered something crude under his breath, but didn't lower his weapon. Lyle's horse still twitched nervously, remembering Bristle's attack. The dog stood protectively in front of the cage now, hackles raised, steady despite the odds. Barlow walked toward the cage, slow and measured. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he called up to Evan. "You think unlocking that cage changes the world? Newsflash, Cowboy. People like her don't get freedom. They get punished." Claire's voice rang out sharply. "For protecting children? That's the punishment you sell?" Barlow grinned, lips curling. "Punishment ain't about truth, sweetheart. It's about who owns the story." He turned his gaze back to Evan. "But you already know that, don't you? You're here because someone owned yours once." Evan's stomach tightened, but he didn't respond. Barlow took another step. "Put the gun down. Walk away. I'll even pay you for the trouble. 200 is yours. No harm done." "And her?" Evan demanded. "Oh, she'll come with me." Barlow shrugged like the matter was as harmless as buying a mare. "Eastbound buyers don't care what she did. They care what she looks like." Claire's fingers clenched around the bars so tightly her knuckles whitened. Evan cocked the hammer back. The sound cracked through the hollow. "She's not going anywhere with you." Royce raised his rifle higher. "Then you're dead." "No," Barlow said, a disturbingly calm note in his voice. "He's not dead yet. That comes after we get the girl." He motioned sharply to Hank and Lyle. "Circle around. Climb the ridge. Bring him down off that ledge." Hank and Lyle immediately backed their horses away from the entrance to the hollow, searching for the slope that would give them a higher path. Evan cursed under his breath. He had expected the approach straight through the ravine. He hadn't counted on them splitting, flanking him like a military tactic. If they reached the top behind him, he would lose his only advantage. Claire saw the shift. "They're going around," she whispered, panic mixing with anger. "I see it," Evan called back. "You need to move," she said urgently. "Now." He pressed himself closer to the rock face, scanning both sides. Hank and Lyle were already halfway up the slope, their rifles slung across their backs as they climbed fast and steady. Barlow remained below, watching Claire like she were a trophy he'd already earned. "Brooks!" Hank shouted. "You got nowhere to go!" Lyle's boots scraped loudly as he reached the next ledge. "Drop the gun, and maybe we won't smash your skull in." Evan's heart pounded against his ribs. Rage battled with fear. He couldn't shoot all of them, he couldn't outrun them, and he couldn't leave Claire. His breath fogged the cold air as he made his choice. He moved. A gunshot cracked the air. Royce firing from below, the bullet sparking against the rock inches from Evan's hand. Evan ducked reflexively, lost his footing, and slipped down the ridge just enough to send a shower of stones tumbling into the hollow. Barlow barked a laugh. "You're outnumbered, Brooks! You're outmatched! Give it up!" Evan ignored him, pushing himself back onto the ledge. He fired a warning shot toward Hank, not to hit him, but to force him behind the rock outcrop. Hank ducked instantly, swearing, but Lyle was closer, too close. Lyle lunged upward, hand grabbing Evan's coat. Evan jerked back, struggling to keep his balance. The revolver almost slipped from his grip. Lyle's other hand reached for the barrel. Evan slammed his elbow into Lyle's jaw. The impact sent Lyle's head snapping sideways with a grunt. He lost his grip, boot slipping on loose gravel. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Lyle's arms flailing, the cliff edge beneath him, the hollow silent. Then gravity pulled. Lyle fell, tumbling down the rocky slope until he hit the ground below with a sickening thud. His horse reared in panic. Barlow cursed. Royce shouted. Hank yelled Lyle's name and tried to climb faster. Barlow looked up at Evan, face turning cold and murderous. "That was your first mistake," he snarled. Evan climbed higher, trying to regain his position, but Hank reached the upper ridge and aimed his rifle. Claire's voice cut through the chaos. "Evan, down!" He dropped flat as Hank fired. The bullet tore over his head and shattered rock behind him. Barlow raised his rifle next. Bristle barked furiously, throwing himself against the cage bars as though trying to protect Claire with sheer force. Evan knew he only had seconds before another shot found him. Then Tommy's voice thundered into the hollow. "Stop! Hold your fire!" Barlow whipped around. "Boy, you better have a—" Tommy fired a shot into the air. Everyone froze. Tommy's horse skidded into the clearing, breath steaming, and Tommy shouted, "Sheriff Boone is on his way! He knows what you're doing! He knows about the sale!" Barlow's face drained of color, then flushed with rage. "You lying little—" "It's the truth," Tommy said. "He's coming fast." Evan stared from the ridge. Claire's eyes widened. Even Hank hesitated. Barlow growled like an animal cornered. "We finish this now. Give me the girl. We move before Boone arrives." He grabbed the cage door. Claire backed away as far as the bars allowed. From above, Evan fired again. The bullet blasted the lock clean off. Barlow stumbled back with a shout. Claire gasped. The cage door swung open with a metallic groan. For the first time since this nightmare began, Claire Dawson was not locked in, and for the first time, Barlow Granger realized he was losing control. The hollow erupted into chaos, and the next chapter would decide who survived it. Chaos exploded through the hollow the moment the cage door swung open. Barlow lunged toward Claire, but Bristle hurled himself at the man's legs with a ferocity no one expected from such a battered creature. Barlow staggered, cursing, kicking the dog away, but the moment's delay was all Claire needed to slip free from the bars. Evan scrambled down the ridge, sliding on loose gravel as Hank fired another shot. The bullet screamed past his shoulder and ricocheted into the sky. Evan hit the ground hard. Breath knocked from him, but he pushed himself up and ran toward Claire. "Stay behind me!" he shouted. Claire didn't argue. Her face was pale, bruised, determined. Bristle limped to her side, snarling at anyone who came close. Tommy kept his gun raised at Barlow's men. "Nobody move! Boone is almost here!" Barlow turned on him with the wild-eyed fury of a man watching his plans unravel. "I'll kill you myself, boy." He reached for his rifle. Evan fired first, not to kill, but to force Barlow back. The shot hit the ground near Barlow's boots, kicking up dirt. Barlow dove behind his horse, teeth bared in a savage snarl. Hank shouted, "We're losing control!" But Royce grabbed his arm. "We drop 'em now before the law shows up!" Royce raised his rifle toward Claire. Evan moved. He tackled Claire to the ground just as the shot fired. The bullet struck the iron cage with a sharp metallic ring, sending sparks into the air. Claire gasped, but she wasn't hit. "Stay low," Evan said, voice tight. Claire nodded, hands trembling but her gaze steady. Royce cursed and reloaded. Tommy turned his gun on Royce. "Put it down! Don't make this worse!" Royce spat at him. "You ain't got the guts to pull that trigger!" Tommy's hands shook, but he didn't lower his weapon. Hank spotted Evan moving toward Claire again and swung his rifle toward them. Evan ducked, grabbed a chunk of broken rock, and hurled it at Hank's arm. The blow sent Hank's shot wide. The bullet tore into the bark of a pine tree instead of Evan's chest. "You're dead, Brooks!" Hank shouted, fury twisting his features. Evan didn't look away from him. "Come and try." Barlow used the chaos to scramble around the cage, circling toward Claire. She saw him coming and reached behind her, fingers closing around the fallen lock Evan's bullet had shattered. It was heavy, jagged. Barlow lunged. Claire swung. The lock slammed into Barlow's cheek with a crack. He reeled backward, stunned, blood trickling down his jaw. "You," he hissed, clutching his face. "Little." Before he finished the threat, Bristle launched at him again, teeth finding the coat sleeve and shaking hard. Barlow roared, flinging the dog aside, but the distraction shoved him off balance long enough for Evan and Claire to scramble away. Tommy, seeing an opening, shouted to Evan, "Back toward the ridge! Boone'll come from the north trail!" Evan grabbed Claire's wrist. "Move!" They sprinted toward the northern edge of the hollow, weaving between rocks. Bullets snapped through the air behind them. Royce fired again, shouting something vicious, but Tommy shoved him, sending the shot high. Royce turned on Tommy, fist raised, but Tommy swung the butt of his pistol downward. It connected with Royce's jaw. Royce crumpled to the frozen ground. "You idiot!" Hank screamed. "You just made yourself a target too." "I ain't on your side anymore," Tommy shouted back. Barlow wiped the blood off his jaw, eyes blazing with hatred. "All of you are dead when I'm done with you!" He aimed his rifle at Claire's back. Evan spun, grabbed Claire's shoulders, and shoved her behind a boulder as Barlow fired. The bullet struck rock with a violent crack, shards spraying across the ground. One shard sliced Evan's cheek. He barely felt it. "You can't outrun me, Brooks," Barlow bellowed. "I'll skin you alive." Evan's breath came ragged as he and Claire ducked behind another boulder. Bristle limped after them, still growling. Claire gasped for breath. "We can't stay here." "I know," Evan said. He checked his revolver. 2 bullets left. "Incoming!" Tommy shouted suddenly. A new sound cut through the hollow, distant, rhythmic, but growing louder. Hoofbeats, but these were steady, disciplined. Not the chaotic thunder of Barlow's men. Sheriff Boone. Evan saw Barlow's eyes shift toward the sound. Panic flashed across his face. "We finish this before Boone reaches us!" he snarled. He ran for Claire again. Evan met him head-on. The 2 men collided hard, rolling across the frozen dirt. Evan's revolver flew from his hand, skidding out of reach. Barlow swung wildly, fist slamming into Evan's jaw with a crack that rattled his teeth. Evan grabbed Barlow's coat, threw him to the ground, and swung back. Barlow blocked the punch and jammed an elbow into Evan's ribs. Claire looked around desperately. Her eyes landed on the revolver lying 5 yards away. She sprinted toward it, ignoring the pain screaming through her body. Royce groaned where he lay. Hank saw her and aimed, but Bristle leapt between them, barking furiously. "Get out of my way, mutt!" Hank yelled, kicking the dog aside. Claire dove for the revolver. Barlow saw her. "No!" he roared, scrambling toward her. Evan grabbed Barlow's ankle, dragging him back. Barlow fell face first into the dirt. Evan climbed on top of him, pinning him down. Claire reached the gun. Her hands shook violently. She raised it, aiming at Barlow. The hoofbeats grew louder. Evan shouted, "Claire, don't shoot unless you must!" Barlow thrashed violently. "Just do it, girl," he taunted. "Prove them right! Prove you're a danger!" Claire's eyes burned with terror and fury. Her finger trembled on the trigger. And then, "Drop the weapons!" A commanding voice boomed across the hollow. Sheriff Boone burst into the clearing with 3 deputies at his side, rifles drawn. Everything stopped. Barlow froze under Evan's grip. Hank slowly lifted his hands. Royce groaned on the ground. Tommy sagged with relief. Claire lowered the gun, tears streaking down her bruised face. Boone surveyed the scene, eyes sharp as winter steel. "Looks like I arrived just in time," he said, voice hard. "And from what I'm seeing, there's a whole lot of explaining to do." Evan released Barlow and slowly rose to his feet. The law had arrived, but the fight for the truth, Claire's truth, was only just beginning. Snow Hollow fell into a tense, brittle silence as Sheriff Boone dismounted his horse. His deputies fanned out behind him, steady men, the kind who had seen violence before, but never this particular brand of chaos. Boone's presence seemed to pull the cold tighter around everyone, like winter itself paused to make room for judgment. He swept his gaze across the clearing. "Weapons on the ground," he ordered, voice sharp as a splitting axe. Hank dropped his rifle immediately. Royce, groaning and barely conscious, could do little more than lift a hand weakly. Barlow, still kneeling with dirt on his face and blood on his jaw, glared up at Boone with simmering hatred, but did not reach for his gun. Claire stood near the boulder, the revolver dangling in her hand. Evan walked to her slowly, gently touching her wrist. "Let me," he said. She exhaled shakily and placed the revolver into his palm. Evan laid it carefully on the ground. Boone's eyes landed on Claire. His expression changed, softened for the briefest moment. He'd known her mother once, years ago. He recognized her features, even under the bruises. "Claire Dawson," he said quietly. "You're hurt." Claire lifted her chin. "I'm all right." "You don't look all right." "I'm alive. That's enough." Boone nodded once, then turned to Tommy. "Explain." Tommy swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Sheriff, they were selling her. Barlow had buyers waiting east. She didn't do what they claimed. She saved 2 kids. Those men lied. And Barlow, he planned something awful." Boone raised a hand. "Start from the beginning." And so Tommy did, haltingly at first, then with gathering strength. He told Boone everything. The assault in Willow Bend, Claire's defense of the children, the lies told by the men she wounded, the sheriff willing to look the other way, and Barlow stepping in under the guise of mercy. Boone listened with a grim, unreadable expression. His deputies took notes, their pens scratching against paper like winter branches scraping a window. "And Brooks?" Boone asked finally, nodding at Evan. Evan met his eyes. "Barlow hired me to guard her for 3 days. Pay was good. Too good. I should have questioned it." His jaw tightened. "I didn't. Not until I saw the truth." Barlow spat blood into the snow. "You're all fools if you believe this. She's manipulative as hell." Boone stepped toward him. "Barlow Granger, I've had my eye on you for months. Rumors about trafficking, coercion, exploitation. But rumors ain't evidence." He gestured to the scene around them. "Today is different." Barlow's lip curled. "You think this changes anything? She's a danger." "Funny," Boone said. "She seems to be the only one who hasn't fired a weapon today." Barlow's eyes burned with fury. Boone motioned to his deputies. "Cuff him." Royce and Hank exchanged terrified glances as the deputies approached. Hank opened his mouth to argue, but Boone cut him off. "You're being detained for questioning. All of you." Tommy stiffened. "Sheriff," Boone raised a hand. "Not you, Ridge. You came to warn us. That counts for something." Relief washed over Tommy's features, but Claire wasn't watching the arrests. She was watching the ridge where Evan had fought. Her expression seemed to linger there, on the edge between gratitude and guilt. Boone followed her gaze. "You two fought hard." Evan nodded. "Didn't have much choice." "There's always a choice," Boone said quietly. "Most men choose wrong." His gaze shifted to Barlow, now restrained and struggling against the cuffs. "Get them on their horses," Boone instructed. "We'll take them to Willow Bend for a formal inquiry." Hank and Royce were pushed toward their mounts. Barlow fought every step, shouting curses that echoed off the cliffs. The deputies ignored him. Boone turned to Claire. "You'll ride with me. You need a doctor." Claire shook her head. "Others need help more than I do. You lost blood. Your ribs might be cracked. You're shaking." "I can walk." Evan stepped forward. "She won't make it far in her condition." Claire glanced at him, eyes flashing stubbornly, but she didn't dispute it. Boone sighed. "Fine. Brooks, help her up." Evan hesitated, just for a moment, before placing a steadying hand on Claire's arm. She leaned into him only slightly, but enough to remind him how fragile she truly was. Bristle limped along, tail low, refusing to leave her side. Boone noticed the dog. "That mangy thing part of your group?" Claire shook her head. "No. He saved me. Then he comes to." They made slow progress through the hollow as the wind carried the last remnants of gunpowder and fear away. Tommy stayed close behind them, eyes darting between Evan and Claire, protective and guilt-ridden all at once. After several minutes, Boone slowed his horse. "We'll stop here," he said. "Need to bandage some wounds before we ride farther." They gathered beneath a sheltered outcropping where the wind hit less fiercely. The deputies dismounted to check equipment and tie Barlow more securely. Hank and Royce sat slumped, trembling and silent. Boone removed a small medical pouch from his saddle. "Claire, sit." Reluctantly, she did. Evan stayed beside her, unsure if she wanted him there but unwilling to leave. Boone cleaned the cut on her cheek with rough gentleness. Claire barely winced. "You're fortunate," Boone said. "Another day. Things could have ended differently." Claire nodded, her voice small. "I know." Evan's jaw clenched. "She wouldn't have had another day." Boone paused. "No, she wouldn't." He finished bandaging her cheek and wrapped her wrists. When he stood, his gaze locked on Evan. "You'll need treatment, too." "I'm fine," Evan muttered. "You're bleeding on the snow," Boone replied. "Sit." Evan sat, grumbling. Boone cleaned the wound across his cheek. It stung like fire. Evan didn't flinch. "That was stupid, what you did," Boone said. "Brave, but stupid." "Story of my life." Boone almost smiled. Almost. "Well, stupid or not, you saved her." Claire's eyes lifted. He did. Their gazes met briefly, fragile, unspoken, powerful. Boone straightened. "Once we get back to Willow Bend, statements will be taken. The children will confirm her story. The town will have to answer for its lies." Claire's breath trembled. "But people believe what they want to believe." "They will believe the truth," Boone said firmly, "because I'll put it in front of their faces till they choke on it." Evan studied the sheriff, surprised by the steel in his tone. Boone glanced at the bound men. "Barlow's influence ends today." A gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a new silence, one that felt less like fear and more like the first edge of hope. Tommy approached quietly. "Sheriff, when do we ride?" "In 10 minutes, Boone said. "Gather what you need." Tommy nodded and left. Claire turned to Evan. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not walking away." "I tried," he said honestly. "Couldn't." Her eyes softened. "I'm glad." Bristle nudged Evan's knee, whining softly as if echoing her sentiment. Boone watched them from a distance, unreadable. Then he mounted his horse again. "Get ready," he called. "The road ahead won't be easy, but it's the right one." And as the group prepared to leave the hollow behind, none of them realized that the most dangerous part wasn't the escape. It was what awaited them in Willow Bend. The ride toward Willow Bend cut through a long stretch of frozen pines and open valleys, the kind where the wind carried distant echoes and the snow looked untouched for miles. Sheriff Boone led the group, posture straight, eyes sharp. Behind him rode Claire on his spare horse, wrapped in a blanket but still shivering. Evan stayed close, making sure she didn't slip from the saddle. Tommy watched the rear, while the deputies kept Barlow and his men tightly controlled between them. Every so often, Claire's breathing hitched. Evan noticed each time. "You holding on?" he asked quietly. She nodded, but didn't speak. Her fingers dug into the horse's mane like she was anchoring herself against memories still clawing at her mind. Bristle trotted alongside the horses, limping but determined. He refused to fall behind, even when the cold made his injured side stiffen. Boone slowed his horse until he rode beside Evan. "Storm's coming," he said, glancing at the thick clouds gathering over the mountains. "We need to push through." "How far out are we?" Evan asked. "Hour and a half if nobody slows." His eyes flicked toward Claire, and Evan caught the meaning. Boone didn't want to push her harder than she could bear, but Claire, sensing their concern, muttered, "Keep going. I'm fine." She wasn't. Evan could see her exhaustion like a shadow at her back. They pressed forward until the snow began falling in thin, drifting flakes. Tommy rode up beside them. "Something's bothering me," he said under his breath. "What if Willow Bend doesn't believe the sheriff? Some of them folks. They liked Barlow's money." Boone overheard. "I intend to speak with the judge directly. The children will testify. Their families know the truth. It won't be as easy to bury this as they think." "And if the sheriff back in Willow Bend still tries to hide it?" Evan asked. "That man lost his seat this morning," Boone said. "County decision. I'm the acting sheriff until the vote is final." Evan blinked, surprised. Claire looked up, startled. "You came because of the telegram," she said. "But you also came because you knew they wouldn't do anything unless someone forced them." Boone didn't answer directly. "Let's just say I've known for a long time the law needed cleaning in Willow Bend." The storm grew steady, the white curtain thickening around them. The wind howled through the pines, bending their tops like frail branches. The deputies tightened their coats. Horses snorted impatience. "We need shelter," Evan said. "If we ride straight into that storm—" "We keep moving," Boone said firmly. "Stopping will make us slow targets, and Granger's friends don't take kindly to losing business." The meaning settled cold in Evan's gut. Barlow had allies, men who would ride after them, men who didn't fear the law. A sudden crack of a branch echoed through the trees. All the horses jolted. Bristle growled. "Easy," Tommy called out, steadying his mount. Boone raised a hand. Everyone halted. The snowfall softened the world into muffled silence. The trees stood like tall specters. The only movement was the wind and the faint trembling of the horses. Then another sound drifted through the storm. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Claire stiffened. Evan's hand hovered near his revolver. Boone glanced to his deputies. "Stay alert. Eyes sharp." The hoofbeats grew louder but stayed hidden behind the snowfall. The storm swallowed the direction, twisting echoes. Then a shout cut through the trees. "Sheriff Boone, that you?" Boone exhaled sharply. "It's Deputy Carter." Relief softened his posture. He must have ridden out to meet us. A moment later, a lone rider emerged through the flurry. Deputy Carter, wrapped in a heavy coat, hat pulled low, rifle strapped behind him. But the moment he rode close enough for his face to be seen, Evan felt something in his chest sink. Carter wasn't relieved. He wasn't even calm. He was afraid. Boone rode forward. "Carter, report!" Carter swallowed. "Sheriff, it's the town. Word spread fast. Too fast. Folks know about the girl. Some say she's trouble. Others say she's a hero. But—" he hesitated. "There's a group gathered outside the courthouse." Tommy tensed. "A mob?" Carter nodded. "I wouldn't call them a crowd of well-wishers." Claire's breath shook, but she forced her chin up. "I'm not afraid of them." The truth was written on her face. She was terrified, but she wasn't backing down. Boone turned his horse toward the town. "We're riding in under my order. Anyone stands in our way answers to the law." Evan leaned closer to Claire. "Stay beside me." "I will," she whispered. The storm parted enough for the blurred outline of Willow Bend to appear, a cluster of warm lights flickering behind the haze. As they grew closer, voices rose, angry, restless, unclear but full of heat. The mob. Men and women in thick coats stood outside the courthouse, some clutching lanterns, others gripping pitchforks, rifles, kitchen knives, whatever they could grab before rushing out into the storm. Boone's jaw tightened. "Damn it!" The crowd's shouting sharpened as they spotted the riders approaching. "That's her! She's dangerous! She attacked our boys! She saved Sophie and Jamie! You weren't there! She ain't going free! Let the sheriff handle it!" Barlow was right. Evan scanned the crowd, pulse racing. He saw fear twisted into anger, confusion turned into hostility. Some townsfolk looked torn. Others looked ready to rip Claire from the saddle. Bristle growled, bristling. The deputies tightened their reins. Boone raised his voice, booming over the mob. "Clear the way! We are conducting a legal investigation!" Half the crowd hesitated. The other half surged forward. Claire trembled. Evan placed a firm hand over hers on the saddle horn. "I'm right here," he whispered. Her breathing steadied. The mob parted only slightly, enough for Boone to push through at a slow, heavy pace. Every step of the horses seemed to crunch louder than the storm. Inside the courthouse foyer, the noise dimmed. The deputies dragged Barlow, Hank, and Royce toward the holding cells. Tommy followed closely. Bristle stayed pressed against Claire's leg. Boone addressed his men. "Carter, get Judge Wayland immediately. Tell him this trial starts tonight." Carter nodded and sprinted out. Boone turned to Evan. "Keep her inside. Don't let her near the windows. Crowds turn quickest when they see what scares them." Evan nodded. Claire sank onto a bench, exhausted. He sat beside her. "You'll get your chance to tell the truth." She met his gaze. "And if the truth isn't enough?" His voice softened. "Then I'll be." Claire looked down at Bristle, who rested his head on her knee, eyes tired but loyal. Outside, thunderous knocking shook the courthouse doors as the storm raged on, mirroring the storm gathering inside the town. The real battle was about to begin. Inside the courthouse, the storm's howl faded to a low, distant moan, as if the world outside were holding its breath. Lanterns glowed along the hallway walls, casting long, uneasy shadows that flickered with every gust of wind. Claire sat on the wooden bench beside Evan, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were pale. Bristle lay at her feet, his fur damp from the snow, eyes fixed on the door, as though ready to defend her against whatever came next. Down the hall, Boone spoke in urgent tones to Deputy Carter, who had returned with Judge Wayland, a tall, stern man with silver-rimmed spectacles and a face carved by years of disappointment with the world. His coat was still dusted in snow, and he looked as though he had been dragged directly from his fireplace. "Let's get this over with," Wayland said, pushing past Boone. "We need statements, facts, no theatrics." Boone nodded. "Agreed." But the muffled roar of the crowd outside said otherwise. The mob wasn't interested in facts. They wanted a verdict they had already decided. Evan watched the judge carefully. "You sure he's on the right side of this?" Boone exhaled. "He's on the side of evidence." "That's as much as we can hope for." Judge Wayland approached Claire, his expression unreadable. "Miss Dawson," he began, "I intend to hear your full account tonight. But first I must ask, are you prepared to speak publicly? The town is divided." Claire straightened, swallowing against the dryness in her throat. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll speak." Evan admired the strength in her voice, even if it trembled. Bristle nudged her hand. She stroked the dog's head, drawing comfort from the simple connection. Wayland signaled to Boone. "Bring the accused in, separately, and I want the children here too. Their statements matter most." Boone nodded to Carter. "Go get Sophie and Jamie. Their parents will fight it, but bring them. They deserve the chance to tell the truth." Carter hurried out the back door toward the Dawson homestead. While they waited, Barlow was dragged into the main hearing room, wrists bound, jaw bruised, eyes burning with hatred. He scanned the room until his gaze locked on Claire. "You think this court'll save you?" he snarled. "You think they'll believe your sob story?" "Enough," Boone snapped, pushing him into a chair. Royce and Hank were brought in next, both bruised and shaken. Tommy lingered near the doorway, nervous but resolute. Judge Wayland cleared his throat. "We're beginning now." The deputies closed the doors, shutting out the noise from outside. The room felt smaller, tighter, the air heavy with tension. Claire sat at the front, Evan beside her like a silent shield. Wayland opened a small leather ledger. "Miss Dawson, in your own words, recount the events that led us here." Claire inhaled deeply. "There were 2 children, Sophie and Jamie, walking home after church. I heard them scream. When I turned the corner, I saw 3 men pulling at them. Jamie was on the ground. One of them put his hand over Sophie's mouth. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. I had a knife. I used it. I didn't think. I just reacted." Barlow snorted. "She attacked without reason." Wayland slammed his hand on the desk. "You will remain silent unless spoken to." Barlow's jaw clenched. Claire continued, voice steadier. "The men ran. When the sheriff arrived, they told a different story. Said the children had wandered off, that I tried to harm them. But Sophie and Jamie, they cried, and they tried to speak, but nobody listened." Evan felt anger coil in his gut. Wayland looked to Boone. "You have statements?" Boone nodded. "From Tommy, from Carter, and from Brooks." Wayland turned to Evan. "Mr. Brooks, what made you turn against your employer?" Evan swallowed. "Because what he was doing wasn't justice. It wasn't even close. Claire was chained in a cage like an animal. He intended to sell her. I knew then I couldn't stand by." Barlow laughed bitterly. "You're a washed-up rancher who needed cash. Don't act like you grew a conscience." Evan stared at him coldly. "I didn't grow one. I remembered I had one." Judge Wayland nodded slowly, making notes in his ledger. "Thank you." He turned to Tommy. "Mr. Ridge?" Tommy stepped forward, voice trembling. "I followed Barlow because I needed work." He shot Barlow a glare. Didn't know he meant to hurt her. But when I found out what the buyers wanted, Tommy shook his head. I couldn't let it happen. Barlow surged against his restraints. Traitor! Sit him back, Boone ordered. The deputies shoved Barlow into the chair again, this time binding his ankles. Then the door opened, and Carter returned, ushering in Sophie and Jamie, the two small children from the church. They clutched their mother's hands tightly, eyes wide with fear. Claire's breath caught. Sophie. Jamie. The children's eyes lit up when they saw her. Claire! Sophie cried, breaking free of her mother and running toward her. Jamie followed. Their mother stared at Claire with guilt etched in her face. Claire knelt, ignoring the pain in her ribs, and hugged them both tightly. It's all right, she whispered. You're safe. Waylon's face softened. Children, can you tell me what happened that night? Sophie clung to Claire's sleeve. They grabbed Jamie, she said quietly, and they said they'd hurt him if I screamed. Jamie nodded, eyes filling with tears. Claire saved us. She cut the bad man's arm so we could run. Waylon's jaw tightened. Did Claire try to harm you? Both children shook their heads violently. No, she helped. The room fell silent. Barlow's face twisted in panic. Waylon closed the ledger. I have heard enough. Boone stepped forward. Judge? Wayland rose, voice carrying authority even through the storm battering the walls. Claire Dawson is cleared of all accusations, effective immediately. Claire sagged with relief, tears spilling down her cheeks. Evan caught her before she could fall. Wayland pointed at Barlow. As for you, human trafficking, unlawful detainment, conspiracy, assault, the list is long. Deputies, take him to the county jail. He will stand a trial in Helena. Barlow screamed curses as he was dragged out, but no one paid him attention anymore. Even the mob outside quieted as Carter announced the verdict through the open window. Sophie and Jamie hugged Claire once more before their mother led them out. Tommy wiped his eyes. Thank God, he whispered. Boone approached Claire gently. You're free now. Claire nodded slowly, looking back at Evan with gratitude shining through exhaustion. But as she opened her mouth to speak, a loud crash shook the courthouse walls. Glass shattering, voices shouting. The mob wasn't done, and the danger wasn't over yet. Below is Chapter 10, written in American English, third-person omniscient, approximately 1,000 words, emotionally complete, closing the entire story. You asked for only the content, so there is no heading, no explanations, no word count report. The crash came like a cannon blast, splintering glass, roaring voices, and boots pounding against the wooden porch of the courthouse. Claire instinctively pulled closer to Evan, while Bristle stood rigid before them, teeth bared, fur rising like a ridge along his spine. Boone and the deputies rushed to the shattered window, weapons drawn as the mob surged in the freezing wind outside. They're breaking in on the east side, Deputy Carter shouted, slamming the back door shut. Judge Wayland tightened his coat, looking suddenly much older. They've come for her, he muttered. They won't respect the verdict. Evan stepped protectively in front of Claire. They'll have to go through me. The mob's chants thundered through the walls, angry, confused, fueled by the lies that had circulated for weeks. They wanted vengeance, and truth no longer mattered. Heavy blows crashed against the main doors as wooden beams strained and groaned under the pressure. "Brace it!" Boone commanded. Several deputies shoved a large table against the doors, securing it with whatever they could find. Dust rained from the ceiling as another impact shook the room. Claire trembled. Evan, They won't stop. He took her hand, firm and steady. Yes, they will. We'll end this tonight. Bristle growled low, pacing restlessly between them. Tommy looked at the barricade. Sheriff, we can't hold this place forever. Boone scanned the room, eyes sharp. We need another way out. Carter, check the storage corridor. There's a service door that leads behind the stables. Carter hurried off. Wayland rubbed his temples. This is madness. The verdict was clear. Verdict doesn't matter to people who feel cheated out of their own hate. Boone replied. Evan turned to Claire. We'll get you out. You'll be free for real this time. Before Claire could respond, another crash echoed, this one from above. The men outside had climbed onto the balcony roof. Wooden shutters splintered as fists and boots hammered from every direction. The courthouse wasn't going to last long. Carter ran back in, breathless. Sheriff, the service door is open, but they're circling around. We have maybe 2 minutes. Boone nodded, steel settling into his eyes. Everyone move. Now. Evan wrapped Claire's cloak tightly around her shoulders. She winced, the bruises along her ribs still tender. But she met his gaze with a determined steadiness. Let's go, she whispered. Bristle nudged her leg, ready. They hurried down the narrow corridor, lanterns flickering as the building trembled under the mob's assault. The wind hissed through cracks in the boards, carrying the smell of snow and gunpowder. At the end of the hall, Carter pushed open the service door. Cold night air rushed inside, stinging their faces. The stables lay beyond, cloaked in darkness except for the faint glow of lanterns swaying in the storm. Boone motioned for Evan and Claire to go first. Get to the stables. Take my horse. He's the strongest. Ride south until the road forks. Stay off the main trail. Evan hesitated. Sheriff, what about you? Boone smirked. I'll buy you time. Don't argue. Before Evan could protest, a gunshot rang out, shattering a lantern behind them. Glass exploded, flames licking the wall. They're around back, Tommy yelled. Boone shoved Evan forward. Go! Evan grabbed Claire's hand and ran into the swirling snow, Bristle racing beside them. The wind howled like a wild animal as they crossed the open stretch toward the stables. Behind them, deputies exchanged fire with the attackers, flashes lighting up the night like lightning. A shadow burst from behind a wagon, one of the mob wielding a club. He swung toward Claire. Evan lunged, blocking the blow with his forearm. Pain shot up his arm, but he drove his fist into the man's jaw, dropping him into the snow. Claire gasped. Evan! I'm fine. Keep moving. They reached the stable doors, pushing them open. Warm air, thick with the smell of hay and horses, enveloped them. Boone's chestnut stallion snorted nervously but didn't kick. Evan saddled him quickly, hands shaking from adrenaline. Claire struggled to climb up, but Evan guided her gently, lifting her by the waist until she was firmly seated. He mounted behind her, wrapping one arm securely around her as he grabbed the reins. Bristle barked, circling anxiously. You're coming too, Evan said. Stay close. More gunshots cracked through the storm. Men shouted, their voices drawing nearer. Lanterns bobbed through the blizzard, shadows flickering across the barn walls. Evan grit his teeth. Hold on tight! He snapped the reins. The horse bolted out of the stable just as the mob reached the yard. Shouts erupted. There! Stop them! Bullets cut through the air. Claire ducked, and Evan shielded her with his shoulder. Snow sprayed around them as the stallion galloped across the open field, hooves pounding through drifts that reached up to its knees. Evan, Claire cried over the wind. If they follow. They won't catch us, he growled. Not tonight. Bristle kept pace on Evan's right, powerful legs plowing through the snow. Behind them, the mob faded into the chaos of gunfire and shouting. Boone and his deputies fought ferociously, giving Evan and Claire the precious minutes they needed to escape. When they finally reached the tree line, Evan pulled the horse to a slower pace, letting it breathe. Claire leaned back against him, exhausted, shivering, not from cold, but from everything they had survived. "Are we safe?" she whispered. "For now," Evan replied. "But we'll keep riding. There's a cabin a few miles south, old Trapper's place. Nobody goes there anymore." Claire nodded, though her eyes were heavy. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Evan tightened his arm around her. "You didn't deserve what they tried to do." The storm softened as they continued deeper into the woods. Snowflakes drifted quietly now, shimmering in the moonlight. Bristle trotted beside them, glancing up as if making sure they were truly safe. After what felt like hours, they reached a small, abandoned cabin. Evan helped Claire down and pushed open the creaking door. The inside was dusty but dry. A small fireplace sat against the wall, still holding a few pieces of wood. Evan lit the fire while Claire wrapped herself in a blanket she found on the shelf. Warmth filled the tiny room, casting a soft amber glow around them. Bristle curled up near the hearth, sighing deeply. Claire watched Evan, tears finally spilling after everything she had held back. "I thought I'd die in that cage," she said, "or that nobody would ever believe me." Evan crossed the room and knelt before her, his hand brushing a tear from her cheek. "You survived because you fought. You told the truth, and because you're stronger than anyone gave you credit for." She leaned into his touch, trembling. "What happens now?" Evan exhaled, gentle but certain. "Now, you live. Freely. And if you'll let me, I'll stay by your side, as long as you want me to." Claire looked at him, eyes shining in the firelight. "I want that," she whispered, "more than anything." Outside, the storm finally broke, leaving only silence and fresh snow. The world felt new again, fragile but hopeful, and inside the small cabin, warmed by firelight and the quiet breath of a loyal dog, two lives battered by fear and injustice began to mend, piece by fragile piece. The nightmare was over, and at last, Claire Dawson was free. The crash came like a cannon blast. Splintering glass, roaring voices, and boots pounding against the wooden porch of the courthouse. Claire instinctively pulled closer to Evan, while Bristle stood rigid before them, teeth bared, fur rising like a ridge along his spine. Boone and the deputies rushed to the shattered window, weapons drawn as the mob surged in the freezing wind outside. "They're breaking in on the east side," Deputy Carter shouted, slamming the back door shut. Judge Whalen tightened his coat, looking suddenly much older. "They've come for her," he muttered. "They won't respect the verdict." Evan stepped protectively in front of Claire. "They'll have to go through me." The mob's chants thundered through the walls, angry, confused, fueled by the lies that had circulated for weeks. They wanted vengeance, and truth no longer mattered. Heavy blows crashed against the main doors as wooden beams strained and groaned under the pressure. "Brace it!" Boone commanded. Several deputies shoved a large table against the doors, securing it with whatever they could find. Dust rained from the ceiling as another impact shook the room. Claire trembled. "Evan, they won't stop." He took her hand, firm and steady. "Yes, they will. We'll end this tonight." Bristle growled low, pacing restlessly between them. Tommy looked at the barricade. "Sheriff, we can't hold this place forever." Boone scanned the room, eyes sharp. We need another way out. Carter, check the storage corridor. There's a service door that leads behind the stables. Carter hurried off. Wayland rubbed his temples. This is madness. The verdict was clear. Verdict doesn't matter to people who feel cheated out of their own hate, Boone replied. Evan turned to Claire. We'll get you out. You'll be free for real this time. Before Claire could respond, another crash echoed, this one from above. The men outside had climbed onto the balcony roof. Wooden shutters splintered as fists and boots hammered from every direction. The courthouse wasn't going to last long. Carter ran back in, breathless. Sheriff, the service door is open, but they're circling around. We have maybe 2 minutes. Boone nodded, steel settling into his eyes. Everyone move. Now. Evan wrapped Claire's cloak tightly around her shoulders. She winced, the bruises along her ribs still tender, but she met his gaze with a determined steadiness. Let's go, she whispered. Bristle nudged her leg. Ready. They hurried down the narrow corridor, lanterns flickering as the building trembled under the mob's assault. The wind hissed through cracks in the boards, carrying the smell of snow and gunpowder. At the end of the hall, Carter pushed open the service door. Cold night air rushed inside, stinging their faces. The stables lay beyond, cloaked in darkness except for the faint glow of lanterns swaying in the storm. Boone motioned for Evan and Claire to go first. Get to the stables. Take my horse. He's the strongest. Ride south until the road forks. Stay off the main trail. Evan hesitated. Sheriff, what about you? Boone smirked. I'll buy you time. Don't argue. Before Evan could protest, a gunshot rang out, shattering a lantern behind them. Glass exploded, flames licking the wall. They're around back, Tommy yelled. Boone shoved Evan forward. Go! Evan grabbed Claire's hand and ran into the swirling snow, Bristle racing beside them. The wind howled like a wild animal as they crossed the open stretch toward the stables. Behind them, deputies exchanged fire with the attackers, flashes lighting up the night like lightning. A shadow burst from behind a wagon, one of the mob wielding a club. He swung toward Claire. Evan lunged, blocking the blow with his forearm. Pain shot up his arm, but he drove his fist into the man's jaw, dropping him into the snow. Claire gasped. Evan, I'm fine. Keep moving. They reached the stable doors, pushing them open. Warm air, thick with the smell of hay and horses, enveloped them. Boone's chestnut stallion snorted nervously but didn't kick. Evan saddled him quickly, hands shaking from adrenaline. Claire struggled to climb up, but Evan guided her gently, lifting her by the waist until she was firmly seated. He mounted behind her, wrapping one arm securely around her as he grabbed the reins. Bristle barked, circling anxiously. You're coming too, Evan said. Stay close. More gunshots cracked through the storm. Men shouted, their voices drawing nearer. Lanterns bobbed through the blizzard, shadows flickering across the barn walls. Evan grit his teeth. Hold on tight! He snapped the reins. The horse bolted out of the stable just as the mob reached the yard. Shouts erupted. There, stop them! Bullets cut through the air. Claire ducked, and Evan shielded her with his shoulder. Snow sprayed around them as the stallion galloped across the open field, hooves pounding through drifts that reached up to its knees. Evan, Claire cried over the wind. If they follow, they won't catch us, he growled. Not tonight. Bristle kept pace on Evan's right, powerful legs plowing through the snow. Behind them, the mob faded into the chaos of gunfire and shouting. Boone and his deputies fought ferociously, giving Evan and Claire the precious minutes they needed to escape. When they finally reached the tree line, Evan pulled the horse to a slower pace, letting it breathe. Claire leaned back against him, exhausted, shivering, not from cold, but from everything they had survived. "Are we safe?" she whispered. "For now," Evan replied. "But we'll keep riding. There's a cabin a few miles south. Old Trapper's place. Nobody goes there anymore." Claire nodded, though her eyes were heavy. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Evan tightened his arm around her. "You didn't deserve what they tried to do." The storm softened as they continued deeper into the woods. Snowflakes drifted quietly now, shimmering in the moonlight. Bristle trotted beside them, glancing up as if making sure they were truly safe. After what felt like hours, they reached a small, abandoned cabin. Evan helped Claire down and pushed open the creaking door. The inside was dusty but dry. A small fireplace sat against the wall, still holding a few pieces of wood. Evan lit the fire while Claire wrapped herself in a blanket she found on the shelf. Warmth filled the tiny room, casting a soft amber glow around them. Bristle curled up near the hearth, sighing deeply. Claire watched Evan, tears finally spilling after everything she had held back. "I thought I'd die in that cage," she said, "or that nobody would ever believe me." Evan crossed the room and knelt before her, his hand brushing a tear from her cheek. "You survived because you fought. You told the truth, and because you're stronger than anyone gave you credit for." She leaned into his touch, trembling. "What happens now?" Evan exhaled, gentle but certain. "Now, you live. Freely. And if you'll let me, I'll stay by your side, as long as you want me to." Claire looked at him, eyes shining in the firelight. "I want that," she whispered, "more than anything." Outside, the storm finally broke, leaving only silence and fresh snow. The world felt new again, fragile but hopeful. And inside the small cabin, warmed by firelight and the quiet breath of a loyal dog, two lives battered by fear and injustice began to mend, piece by fragile piece. The nightmare was over, and at last, Claire Dawson was free. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.